Minimum payment, a story. Evan Park always felt like he was almost out of debt. That was the cruelest part. Not the debt itself. The almost. Every month he told himself the same thing. One more good paycheck. One more skip trip. One more frugal stretch, and he'd finally knock the cards down to zero. And every month the number sat there, stubborn and breathing, refusing to die. He'd pay $400 toward a card, and watch the balance drop by 90. And he never quite let himself do the math on where the other 310 had gone. It had gone where it always went, into the interest, into the quiet machine running underneath his life that he had agreed to feed, once, years ago, with a signature he barely remembered. At 32, Evan worked in human resources for one of the largest logistics companies in the Midwest. A sprawling operation outside Chicago where the parking lot looked like a luxury dealership, and the breakroom coffee cost more than his mother used to spend on dinner. The work wasn't glamorous. Most days were a slow drip of employee complaints, attendance write-ups, onboarding paperwork, and tense conversations with managers who wanted HR to clean up messes they'd created and then deny having made. He was a janitor for other people's behavior, except the messes were human, and they cried in his office, and sometimes they threatened lawsuits. But the job paid well. At least, that's what everyone kept telling him. The cruel joke was that Evan, who counseled employees on financial wellness benefits and handed out pamphlets about budgeting during open enrollment, was carrying more revolving debt than anyone who'd ever sat across from him. He ran the seminar on emergency savings in the morning. He paid for lunch with a card at 61 days past the last statement on the afternoon. It hadn't always been like this. That was what haunted him. There had been a version of Evan, younger, broker, who paid cash for everything because cash was all he had, who would have been horrified by the man he'd become. He still remembered the first card. He was 23. A folding table in the corner of a college bookstore. A girl with a clipboard and a free t-shirt. And a credit card application that took 90 seconds to fill out. $500 limit. He'd signed up for the t-shirt. He genuinely had no other reason. He wore the shirt twice and kept the card. And that was where it started. The whole long avalanche, with a free piece of cotton that fell apart in the wash. Because growing up, Evan knew exactly what being broke looked like. His father laid brick until his knees turned to gravel. His mother cleaned office buildings at night, the same gleaming corporate towers Evan now worked inside, emptying trash cans for people who never looked at her face. The electricity got shut off twice when Evan was a teenager. He still remembered the orange glow of the streetlight through the window the second time, the refrigerator going silent, his mother at the kitchen table in the dark, crying so quietly she thought no one could hear. He heard her. He always heard her. He just learned to pretend he didn't, so when he got that first card, it didn't feel like debt. It felt like a safety net. It felt like the thing his family had never had, a cushion between him and the dark. If the car broke down, the card would catch him. If a check came late, the card would catch him. The card was insurance against ever being that kid by the silent refrigerator again. That was the lie at the center of it. The card never caught him. The card just charged him for the privilege of falling slower. The $500 limit became $1,000. A pre-approved offer arrived in the mail like a gift. A second card, then a third. The limits crept up on their own, unrequested, the bank congratulating him for being a good little borrower by handing him more rope. By his late 20s he had 4 cards, and he had stopped thinking of them as debt at all. They were just how he paid for things. The balance was just a number, the way the sky is just a color. He developed the habits of the indebted without ever deciding to. He paid the minimum, always the minimum, or a little over. Enough to feel virtuous, never enough to matter. He learned the exact rhythm of the due dates and the grace periods, juggling 4 of them like a man keeping plates spinning, moving a payment here to free up a payment there. He stopped opening the statements. The envelopes came and he set them in a drawer, unread, because the only number he ever checked was whether the card would still go through at the register. As long as it didn't decline, he didn't ask. The decline was the only truth he respected, and he organized his entire financial life around avoiding that one small public humiliation. When one card got close to its limit, he opened another and transferred the balance. 0% for 15 months, the offer said. He treated those 15 months like found money, instead of what they were. The promotional rate would expire, and the balance he hadn't paid down would suddenly start accruing at 26%, and he'd transfer it again, paying a 3% transfer fee each time for the privilege, the debt growing a little fatter with every move, like something he was feeding rather than fighting. He never said the real number out loud. He didn't actually know the real number. He knew it was somewhere north of $20,000 across the 4 cards, and he knew that if he ever sat down and added it up precisely and looked at the interest he was paying every month just to stand still, he might not be able to get up from the table. So he didn't add it up. Willful ignorance was the only thing keeping him functional. Then came Melissa. She joined the HR department during one of the company's periodic restructurings, a word that always meant somebody got fired and somebody else inherited their work. Melissa was sharp in a way that didn't announce itself. She drove a paid-off 10-year-old Corolla without a trace of apology. She brought her lunch. She mentioned once, offhand, that she'd cleared the last of her student loans the year before, and described the feeling like someone describing the first breath after surfacing from deep water. Evan liked her the moment she corrected a director in a meeting, politely and completely, and let the silence sit there without flinching. She also, without ever intending to, terrified him. Because Melissa was free in the exact way he was not, and being near her made him feel the weight of his own chains. His friend Tyler felt no such weight. Tyler was the one who'd talked Evan into half the purchases now living on the cards. "You only got one life, bro," Tyler liked to say, usually while suggesting they put something expensive on plastic. "You can't take it with you." Tyler ran his whole existence on credit and treated it like a personality trait. He had a wallet thick with cards and a phone full of points and miles apps, and he genuinely believed he was beating the system, racking up airline miles on money he was simultaneously paying 24% interest to borrow. He'd brag about a free flight to Vegas that he'd paid for 3 times over in finance charges and never once do that subtraction. "It's free money," Tyler said once, about a card with a sign-up bonus. "You just gotta spend $4,000 in 3 months. "I don't have $4,000 to spend," Evan said. "That's the point. You don't spend your money, you spend theirs." Tyler grinned like he'd cracked something open. That's how rich people do it. It was not, in fact, how rich people did it. But Evan was 28 and tired, and the logic was seductive in the way all financial poison is seductive, because it told him the thing he wanted to hear, that he could have it now and the bill was somebody else's problem, later, theoretical, soft. When Melissa mentioned in passing that she'd always wanted to try the rooftop place everyone posted about, the 140 stories up with the skyline laid out like a circuit board, Evan heard himself offer to take her before his brain had finished the decision. The dinner was $390 before the tip. He paid it with the card that had the most room left on it, did the quick mental triage of which balance could absorb the hit, and signed the slip without letting his face change. When she admired his watch in the elevator afterward, turning his wrist gently under the light, he did not tell her he was still making payments on it, that the watch on his wrist was, in the most literal accounting sense, not actually his. He'd financed it 18 months ago, and the balance had outlived 2 of the watch's batteries. He just smiled and said it was a gift to himself. That night, lying awake, he did something he almost never let himself do. He opened the 4 banking apps, one after another, and looked. Card 1, $6,810. Card 2, $5,240. Card 3, $4,990. The one whose 0% window closed in 2 months. Card 4, $7,150, the highest rate of all of them. The one he thought of as the bad one, the emergency one, the one he'd sworn he'd never touch, and then touched anyway. $24,190. He lay there and felt the number settle onto his chest like a physical thing. Then he did the calculation he'd been avoiding for years, the one he was afraid of. He added up the interest. At his blended rate, he was paying somewhere around $440 a month in pure interest. Not principal, not progress. $440 every single month, simply renting the money he'd already spent. More than $5,000 a year, evaporating, buying nothing, just the cost of having said yes too many times. $5,000 a year, the exact amount, he realized, that he could never seem to find to put into savings. He closed the apps and lay in the dark, and the refrigerator in his nice apartment hummed on. And he thought about the silent refrigerator of his childhood, and understood that he had built, with his own 2 hands, and a stack of plastic, a quieter and more permanent version of the same dark. At work, his reputation was a single word: dependable. When the layoffs started rolling through other departments, HR went into permanent crisis mode, and Evan was the steady one. The one who could fire a man with 3 kids on Tuesday and counsel a sobbing supervisor on Wednesday and never let his hands shake. He heard the tension in the building long before the rank and file did. He could read it in the calendar invites, in the way legal kept getting pulled into closed-door sessions, in the careful neutral language the executives started using. Headwinds. Right-sizing. He heard all of it. And he ignored every word, because his entire repayment plan, such as it was, depended on one thing and one thing only: the paycheck never stopping. He was paying $440 a month just in interest. He could only do that as long as the direct deposit hit. He had built a debt that could only be serviced by a job he was watching quietly begin to die. Then the email landed at 7:52 a.m. Mandatory leadership session, 9 a.m. boardroom. Executives and HR only. Evan knew before he sat down. You could smell it. The room had the specific stillness of a place where bad news was about to be made official. Nobody scrolled their phone. The regional director, a man who normally projected the relaxed confidence of someone with 8 months of severance built into his contract, looked like he hadn't slept. The company had lost 2 of its largest contracts, undercut on price by a competitor. Together, those accounts represented something north of a fifth of regional revenue. Operational downsizing, effective immediately. A hiring freeze, budget freezes on everything that wasn't payroll. And then the sentence that turned Evan's spine to ice water. And we'll be looking at management compensation restructuring. He didn't need a translator. He'd written enough of these scripts himself. Bonuses, gone. The bonuses he'd been quietly counting on to finally knock down card 4. Overtime, eliminated. The overtime that had been the only thing letting him pay more than the minimums lately. And on the table, spoken aloud in a carpeted room that smelled of fresh coffee nobody was drinking, the possibility of actual salary reductions. Evan kept his face professional. Inside, he was running the only math that mattered, and it was a horror movie. If his income dropped even slightly, the minimum payments would eat the difference and then some. If it dropped more, he wouldn't make the minimums at all. And he knew, in clinical detail, exactly what happened then, because he'd watched it happen to employees he'd had to counsel. The missed payment, the penalty APR jumping the rate to nearly 30%, the late fees, the call from the bank, the second call, the slow garrote of a balance that grows faster than you can pay it even when you're trying. His whole life was suspended on the thin wire of uninterrupted income. And someone, somewhere above his pay grade, had just walked into the room with scissors. That night, Melissa noticed he was somewhere else. They were at her favorite Thai place, cheap and worn and good, and he couldn't taste any of it. "You okay? You've been quiet." "Yeah, just work stuff." "What kind of work stuff?" He looked at her open face, at the easy way she existed in her own life, debt-free, unhaunted, and he opened his mouth to tell her the truth. "Nothing major," he said instead. Because the truth was a man who owed $24,000 to 4 different banks and paid them $5,000 a year for nothing. And he could not stand the thought of her seeing what he was actually built from. The week after that, his car began to die. It started as a hesitation, then a lurch, then, at a stoplight on Western Avenue, the transmission slammed so hard, the whole frame shuddered. The shop quoted him $3,400. He stared at the service writer. "You're serious?" "Transmission's a transmission. You can baby it a few weeks, not longer." There was no version of this that didn't go on a card. He had no savings. The savings were the $5,000 a year that disappeared into interest. So the only question was which card, and the grim answer was card 4, the bad one, the highest rate. He drove home doing the new math. $3,400 at 26%. If he only made minimums, that one repair would cost him close to $7,000 by the time it was paid off. And it would take him the better part of a decade, and the car wouldn't survive half that long. He was about to pay $7,000 to keep a dying car alive for a few more years. And he had no choice, because the only thing worse than the card was no car, and no way to reach the job that fed the cards. That was the trap, fully closed. He could finally see all 4 walls. That night Tyler called, buoyant, oblivious. "Vegas, next month. I got us comped on points. Just gotta cover the table minimums. You're in, right?" "I can't. Things are tight." Tyler laughed, with an edge now. "Just put it on a card and figure it out after. That's what they're for, bro. Future you's problem." And there it was, said out loud. the entire philosophy that had built Evan's prison. Except, Evan had finally, that week, become future him. He was standing in the wreckage that past Evan had cheerfully charged to a card and walked away from. There was no future him left to pass it to. The bill had arrived, and it had his name on it, and the room behind it was empty. "I gotta go, man," Evan said, and hung up and sat in the quiet. Over the next month, the pressure came from everywhere. The relentless social tax of a life lived around people who all paid with plastic. A group trip, a birthday dinner where the table would just split it. Wedding invitations stacking on the counter, each one a few $100s in a card. And every time Evan tried to pull back, somebody made him feel like a freak. "You good, man? For real? Just put it on a card. You only live once." Each comment was a small hand pushing him toward another swipe. One afternoon, Melissa caught him by the elevators. "You've kind of disappeared on everybody lately." "You good?" He almost lied again. He was so tired of lying. "I'm trying to get out of debt," he said. The word felt enormous in his mouth. He'd never said it to anyone. "Credit cards. It's bad. It's been bad for years and I just stopped looking at it. And now I'm looking at it." He braced for it. The smirk. The "you only live once." She just nodded slowly. "How bad?" 24,000. He waited for her face to change. It didn't. "I had 31 in student loans," she said. "Took me 4 years. The day I paid the last of it, I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and cried like an idiot." She looked at him steadily. "It's the best thing I ever did. Getting out is the best thing you'll ever do. I mean that." No mockery, no judgment, just a hand reaching back toward him from the far side of the same water she'd already crossed. It landed harder than any insult ever had, because it told him the thing he'd stopped believing, that there was a far side, that the water ended, that getting out was a place real people actually reached. That night Evan went home, sat at the kitchen table, and did the thing he had been avoiding for nearly a decade. He took every statement out of the drawer, all of them, the unopened ones, months of them, and he opened each one with a kitchen knife and laid them out in front of him. It was a massacre. The fees, the interest charges, line after line, years of minimum payment due boxes he dutifully fed while the balances barely moved. He made himself read all of it. He added it up by hand on a legal pad, no app to soften it, the actual full number in his own handwriting, $24,190. He sat with it. Then, underneath, he wrote the number he'd never let himself calculate before. The total interest he had paid these banks over the years. Money gone forever. Money that had bought him nothing but the right to keep owing. It was over $19,000. Almost a second car. Almost a down payment on a house. Gone, in increments too small to feel, into the quiet machine. He didn't cry. He'd expected to. Instead, he felt something cold and clean and final. The feeling of a man who has finally stopped lying to himself and discovers underneath the lie a strange and steady floor. No more minimums, no more transfers, no more drawer. The months that followed were brutal in a way that surprised him. He built the plan that night and refused to let himself romanticize it. He listed the 4 cards' smallest balance to largest, the way the personal finance forums said to, the snowball. The thing that worked not because the math was perfect, but because a human being needs to feel a win before the math can save him. He'd throw everything at card 3, the smallest, and pay only minimums on the rest. And when card 3 died, he'd take its whole payment and roll it onto card 2. And the snowball would grow, and the avalanche he'd spent a decade building would finally start running the other way. He sold the watch first. He met the buyer in a coffee shop, handed over the thing he'd financed in humiliating installments, and put every dollar straight onto card 3. It should have felt like loss. It felt like air. He canceled subscriptions he'd forgotten he had, $290 a month bleeding into the void, all of it redirected at the cards. He stopped eating out and learned to cook. He took the dying car to a smaller shop where a semi-retired mechanic named Walter rebuilt the transmission for $1,400 instead of $34, and Evan paid it down aggressively, treating it like the enemy it was. He called the banks. This was the part he'd been most afraid of, the part that felt like admitting weakness to the very machine that had been eating him. But he made the calls, and he asked in a steady voice for lower rates. 2 of the 4 said no. 1 dropped him 3 points. One, to his shock, offered a genuine hardship plan that froze the interest entirely if he committed to a fixed payment. And he committed on the spot, his hand shaking, the relief so sharp, it was almost grief. He stopped using the cards. All of them. He didn't cut them up. The forum said you didn't need the drama of that. But he put them in a drawer and took them out of his wallet and learned to live on the money that was actually his, which was less than he was used to, which was the whole point. Tyler mocked him without mercy. You got boring, bro. You're obsessed with money now. But Evan started noticing something, now that he was watching instead of swiping. Tyler was always stressed, always floating something, always one promotional rate from disaster, always bragging about points while quietly drowning in the balances that earned them. Tyler wasn't beating the system. Tyler was the system's favorite kind of customer, the one who paid every month and never got free. He just decorated the cell with airline miles. Card 3 died in the 4th month. Evan stared at the zero balance on the screen for a long time. Then he did exactly what the plan said, and took that whole payment and rolled it onto card 2, and felt the snowball get heavier, felt it start to gather speed. Card 2 died 8 months after that. Each zero balance was a door he thought was a wall. The compounding that had worked against him for a decade was finally working for him. Every dead card freeing a payment that killed the next one faster. For the first time in his adult life, the numbers were shrinking instead of growing. And watching them shrink was the most addictive thing he had ever felt. More than any purchase, cleaner than any high. Then came the test he didn't know he'd been training for. 14 months after the first announcement, a second wave came. And this time the careful language fell away. This time HR was not protected. This time the lists they'd been building included the people building them. The building came apart. A man Evan had hired 2 years earlier locked himself in a bathroom stall, and Evan could hear him breathing wrong through the door. Managers whispered in stairwells. The executives sent out a memo about resilience. Tyler called that night, and the bravado was scraped down to the bone. "Bro," he said, and his voice was small. "If I lose this job, I'm done. The cards are all maxed, every one of them. And rent's already late, and I can't even make the minimums anymore. I've been paying one card with another card, and it caught up to me." His voice broke. "What do I do?" Evan sat on the edge of his bed, holding the phone, and felt something he hadn't expected. Not triumph. There was no triumph in it. Tyler's voice was his own voice from 14 months ago, the man at the kitchen table afraid to add up the number. And Evan would not gloat at a mirror. But beneath the empathy was a fact, sober and solid. He could ask himself the question the building was screaming, and have an answer. 2 of his 4 cards were dead. The other 2 were shrinking. He had, with the money no longer going to interest, finally started a real emergency fund. A small one, but real. 3 months of bare expenses sitting in an account he didn't touch. He was not free yet, but he was no longer suspended on the wire. He built the beginning of a floor. The layoffs came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday. Evan survived. Tyler did not. And the world, which had spent 14 months telling Evan he was doing it wrong, quietly flipped on its axis. Tyler called now, to ask if Evan could spot him until unemployment cleared. To talk about the collection calls that had already started, the cards defaulting one after another, the penalty rates, the letters. The exact slow garrote Evan had spent a year escaping, tightening now around the friend who'd taught him to put it on. Evan helped where he could. He covered a grocery run. He sat with him. He didn't lecture, because there was nothing to say that Tyler wasn't already living, and because Evan knew, with a clarity that would never leave him, that this had been 14 months and one boardroom decision away from being his own phone call, his own broken voice, his own maxed-out cards defaulting in the dark. Months later, on a rainy evening in early spring, Evan and Melissa sat in a small coffee shop, with the windows fogged and the city blurred to watercolor outside. They'd grown close over those hard months, and he understood now that it had started the exact moment he'd said the number out loud by the elevators, the moment he stopped hiding what he owed. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "How much is left?" He smiled. "Card 4, the bad one, about 5,100. From 24,000. From 24,000. She tilted her head. "You know what that means." "What?" "You already won. The rest is just cleanup." She said it the way someone says a thing they know from the inside. "The hard part isn't the last 5 grand. The hard part was the first night you opened the statements. You already did the hard part." Outside, the rain ticked against the glass. Evan watched it run in long, crooked lines down the window. and thought about the kid by the silent refrigerator, and the kid at the folding table signing up for a credit card to get a free t-shirt, and the man who'd paid $19,000 in interest for the privilege of never quite getting ahead. The card had never been a safety net. He saw that with total clarity now. The card had been the hole he kept mistaking for a net, the thing that promised to catch him, and only ever charged him for falling slower. The people who'd told him to just put it on it had never been building anything with him. They'd been keeping him company in a trap, because a trap gets lonely when you're the only one in it. 6 weeks later, on an ordinary Thursday at his kitchen table, Evan logged in and made the final payment on card 4. He'd imagined this moment for over a year. He'd thought there would be fireworks. There weren't. There was just a screen that refreshed and showed a balance of 0 across all 4 cards, and a little confirmation that said the payment had posted, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator in a kitchen where for the first time in his entire adult life, he did not owe anyone a single dollar. He sat there for a long time. Then, like Melissa in her car in the bank parking lot, he found that his eyes had gone hot and his vision had blurred, and he let it happen, alone at the table, a grown man crying over a number that had finally, after 10 years, become 0. Then he opened a new tab, and into the savings account that had been creeping upward for months, he transferred the $440 that used to vanish every month into interest. The first payment now to himself. A year on, Evan's life looked smaller from the outside. The older car, paid off, running clean under Walter's rebuilt transmission. The plain watch he bought with cash, $40, that kept perfect time. The quiet weekends. No new clothes, no rooftops, no points, no miles. But underneath, where no one could photograph it and no one could envy it, his life had become something the old version could never have imagined. 0 balances, a growing emergency fund, the first nervous, thrilling dollars moving into investments, money compounding for him now instead of against him. The machine finally turned around and running the right direction. And the thing he hadn't known he was starving for the whole time he was starving. Margin. The freedom of a man who owes nothing, who can say no. Then, one Friday afternoon, Evan sat in yet another meeting while the executives floated yet another round of structural adjustments. And he noticed something that nearly made him laugh out loud in the carpeted room. Everyone around the table looked terrified. The directors, the managers, all of them bracing, calculating, hiding the same fear he used to hide. Every one of them, he'd bet, carrying a balance somewhere, owing somebody, suspended on the same wire he'd finally climbed off. And Evan, in his plain watch, with his smaller life and his paid-off car, felt none of it. Not because he was untouchable. He wasn't. Nobody was. That was the whole brutal lesson of the past 2 years. But because for the first time in his life, losing the paycheck would hurt him. It would not own him. He didn't owe the machine anymore. He'd fed it for 10 years and starved it in 2. And now, sitting calmly in a room full of frightened, indebted people, Evan understood that this, exactly this, was what winning had looked like the whole time. Not the watch, not the rooftop, not the card that always went through. Just a man who, when the statement came, no longer had any reason to leave it in the drawer. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please follow the page. We're a new channel trying to reach more listeners like you, and your support truly helps us grow and continue sharing stories that matter. Don't forget to like and leave a comment. And if you have a story of your own you'd like to share, send it in. Our email is in the pinned comment and description below.